Albert was not a lonely man. His days did not exactly have a comfortable rhythm. The rough scratch of the newspaper delivered just before dawn, the same pot of strong tea steeped until it was almost black, and mornings spent tending to his overgrown garden. The weeds always won, but the act of tending was what mattered. Meals were simple leftovers, a reheated sandwich when his appetite was small, evenings with a radio and old westerns flickering on the television, his favorite chair worn to the perfect shape of his body since Mary had died. There was a stillness in the house that even the familiar chatter of the newscasters could not dispel. He told himself it wasn't loneliness, just the natural order of things. He missed her. She missed their easy banter, of course, and how she could read his moods without him saying a word. But life was meant to be lived and end to end, wasn't it? One sunny afternoon, a knock at the door startled him. He wasn't prone to visitors, especially at such an odd hour. Halfway between lunch and dinner. On the stairs stood a young woman, not much more than a girl really. Her fiery red hair spilled out from under a knit cap, and her backpack looked bigger than she was. "I'm lost," she admitted, flashing a sheepish grin that did something funny with the quiet air around the Albert Oakwood campground. "This is what I'm looking for, but I must have gone the wrong way." Her voice was bright and a little breathless, like someone who grew up in a city. Albert had spent his whole life in this small town, knew every back road and well-worn footpath. The campsite was clear in the other direction before he could think of the right words. Another part of him, a rusty instinct he hadn't felt in years, stirred. "Well, it's getting dark. You're welcome to stay, the night has a spare room, and you don't look like the kind to do me any harm." Even as he said it, the words shocked him. Common sense whispered that it was foolish to invite a stranger in, but some instinct in him, long dormant, whispered another word opportunity with a jolt. He realized he couldn't quite remember the last time his house had had an unexpected visitor. The girl, Jessica, she said her name, was already beaming at him. Her whirlwind energy filled his house with relief and gratitude. The moment she walked in, it wasn't just the overflowing backpack or the trail of mismatched socks she left as she followed him to the guest room. It was her, the way she filled the room with stories of places he'd only glimpsed in documentaries, bustling night markets in Thailand, the vast silence of the Australian outback. Jessica's phone chirped incessantly. A stream of messages, or maybe videos, sent to Farah's distant friends. At first the noise annoyed him, but as the afternoon wore on he found himself strangely drawn in, asking about a temple she'd mentioned or a strange-looking fruit. She showed him a picture of a part of him that wanted to retreat to a quiet corner and reassert his routine. Another part. The part he'd almost forgotten existed, whispering that a little more disruption might not be the worst thing. Jessica wouldn't let him back down. With a determined gleam in her eye, she insisted that he show her the waterfall she'd heard about in town. At first, it was an obligation, something to occupy him until she could be on her way. But then he laughed, really laughed, at her terrible attempt to imitate the bird song they had heard before he knew it. A whole afternoon had passed, leaving a lightness in its wake. Small-town gossip travels fast. Soon the well-meaning Mrs. Bennett cornered him at the grocery store. A mischievous twinkle in her eyes said, "I hear you've got a young lady staying with you." Albert stammered something about helping a lost traveler, but if he was honest, Mrs. Bennett's words sparked something in him that he hadn't felt in a long time. Not exactly romantic, but not unpleasant either. The change was subtle. First, when he and Jessica cleared out his attic, he found a box of Mary's old recipe books, a burst of warmth amid the dust. The clutter was overwhelming, but Jessica, In between tales of bungee jumps in New Zealand or bartering for trinkets in a Bangkok market, organized things with surprising efficiency. Things felt lighter. Somehow, there were now gaps in the crammed shelves, and Albert found the space they left less stifling than he'd expected. One evening, as the last of the summer sun streamed through the kitchen window, he overheard Jessica on the phone, her voice subdued and worried. Money problems, it seemed, and a desperate need for a place to stay. Suspicion formed a knot in his stomach. His practical mind screamed warnings and played back the city. The gossip now took on a sharper tone. Mary's voice echoed. A gentle teasing. You were always too trusting, Albert, but then he remembered Jessica smiling as she sang along to his father's old records. He couldn't forget the kindness in her eyes. Without really deciding, he knocked on her door and cleared his throat. Miss Jessica, he said, his voice sounding gruff. Even to himself, it seems that it would be helpful to both of us if you stayed a while longer. This attic of mine isn't going to clear itself. Instead of confrontation, he surprised them both by offering her a short-term job payment in exchange for more help clearing out the attic. Their days took on a new rhythm. They found forgotten treasures, an old pocket watch of his father's, a chipped teapot that sparked a story about Mary's disastrous first attempt at baking. Jessica's eyes lit up with each find, urging him to tell the stories behind the objects his town was beginning to notice. First it was the fresh haircut, prompted by Jessica's horrified gasp at his unruly mop. Then the smile that came to his eyes when Mrs. Bennett teased him again about his houseguest. One afternoon, deep in the garage, they unearthed his old photo albums. Look at these torches. Jessica burst out laughing. Albert, a younger version of himself, stared back at the surprisingly wild haircut hidden under a slouch hat. You were quite a looker back then, Albert. He couldn't help but grin. Time with Jessica had chipped away at the settled calm. He still appreciated his routine, but now there was room for the unexpected. A lot of that unexpected seemed to have to do with technology. First, it was Jessica who taught him how to search the internet for specific gardening tips. You see, Albert, it's like a giant encyclopedia, but much faster. She convinced him to try ordering groceries online. It's like magic, Albert, I swear. Jessica grinned, sitting on the kitchen stool and tapping furiously on his old laptop. You just pick what you want, click a button, and they deliver it right to your door. Albert eyed the screen with deep suspicion. Seems like a lot of fuss to avoid going to the store. Besides, he said, unable to resist a little teasing, what am I going to do with all my free time? Jessica just patted his arm. Trust me, this will open up a whole new world for you. An hour later, he had to admit that there was something strangely satisfying about adding items to a virtual shopping cart. Sure, the site was confusing, and he fumbled a few times, but Jessica patiently walked him through it. When they finally reached checkout, he felt a surge of something like triumph. 2 days later, when a cheerful delivery man brought boxes right into his kitchen, he almost whooped with joy as he unpacked fresh tomatoes, bread that hadn't been crushed in his bag, and even a few treats he might not have bought in person. Albert had to admit, maybe this modern world wasn't so bad after all. Seeing Jessica beaming from the doorway, her hands dusted with flour from her latest baking experiment. I told you it was magical, and then it was time for her to go. She found a job at the diner, a tiny apartment above an old bookstore. Nothing fancy, but her smile held a hope he hadn't seen since Mary. He wished her well. The words caught in his throat, and he knew it wasn't quite goodbye. The day she left, he helped her move her few belongings as they loaded the last box into her friend's battered car. something small and shiny caught his eye. It was the photo from their attic expedition. Him and those ridiculous torches. Mary next to him. Both caught in the middle of a laugh. Jessica held it up. No longer a picture, but nestled in a simple wooden frame. She must have sent a thank you from somewhere. Her voice was soft, reminding me that it's okay to start over, and she hesitated, a smile playing on her lips, showing me that even old houses can have hidden treasures. As he closed the door behind her, the emptiness of his house hit him harder this time, yet differently. The photo, once buried, should be on display. It wasn't just a memory anymore, but a testament to the unexpected joy that had blossomed within his walls. A reminder that even an old dog, as Mary liked to joke, could learn a few new tricks. He found himself drawn to Mary's old recipe book. He smiled, remembering how Jessica's eyes lit up when she discovered the recipe for Mary's famous apple crumble. In that moment, it felt wrong to keep all of Mary's warmth to himself, not when it could light someone else's new beginning. On impulse, he carefully wrapped the book. The next day, he found himself in Jessica's new apartment above the bookstore. Her surprised laugh as she opened the door dispelled his hesitation. "This is for you," he said, handing her the package. "I thought you might need some inspiration for your new kitchen." Her eyes scanned the faded cover, and a broad smile lit her face. "Mary's recipes, Albert. You shouldn't have them. They're no use to me." Sitting on the shelf, he said, a touch of warmth softening his gruffness. "Besides," he added with a hint of mischief, "I could never master that apple crumble." A week later, flyers for a community walking group appeared on the library bulletin board. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the number. Could he do this walk with strangers, making idle chatter? Old Albert would have retreated, found an excuse, but a flicker of Jessica's determined smile nudged him. What did he have to lose? With a deep breath, he dialed the number. His city was full of surprises. As friendly voices welcomed him to the group, he might even have cracked a joke with Mrs. Bennett at the market the next day. Albert wasn't a changed man, not overnight, but he wasn't quite the same man who had opened the door to a lost girl that sunny afternoon. He still enjoyed his quiet mornings. His garden still had more weeds than flowers, but a new melody was weaving its way into the comfortable rhythm of his days. He wasn't lonely, not like before, just open, and that wasn't really what life was about.